In the previous session, we created this input bar and we also have a search button there. And this is the code that we wrote. So we added this section for the input of the button there as well. Now in this session, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding, basically writing our JavaScript, to fetch our recipes from the Forkify API that we'll be using for this, and also see if we can also go ahead and implement a few other features. So now we'll switch to our JavaScript. We've already linked our JavaScript right here into our JavaScript. So we'll just add an event listener first. So document dot add event listener, and they are going to basically listen to DOM content loaded. Again, you can just hover over this to get a feel of what some of these functions do. And it, again, the add event listener, add event listener takes into parameters. So the event and a callback function that is going to basically execute what you want it to execute whenever that event has been fulfilled or whenever that event is triggered. So we're going to have a function here. Now everything we're going to be writing will go inside of this. The first thing you need to get is the search input. We need to get the button, and the rest of the things are going to follow after that. So we'll add the search input, create a variable here, call it search input, and using document dot get element by id, we call it search input, the id, and I'll copy paste this. But the other one was not search. The other one was actually search button, and I'll change this to search button. Now we have the two things that we need: the input and the button. The next thing that we're going to need as well is the API. So before we search and all, I'll create a variable here, and I'll call this variable API URL, API underscore URL, and we're going to be passing in our API. So the API we're going to be using is the Forkify API. And if you try, we're going to try and search it here. So Forkify API. In the API here, you can see all the endpoints that you can use. So this is the endpoint for if you want to search. So you'll go up to search, and there's an example of how such an endpoint is going to look like. Now, what you're going to pick is, in this example URL, we'll pick all these up to here. Then the next where they've written pizza is where the user input goes to. And that we're going to save it for when our user input something. So we'll store it here backtick. So we have the Forkify API like this. And then we're going to have the user query basically at the end there. We'll now create a function, and we're going to call this function fetch recipes. And what this function is going to be doing is, whenever it's going to basically just fetch our recipes, we'll use async and await. So async, then the first thing it checks is a query. Remember, this is the function that is going to be we're going to use basically to fetch our data from the API. We're going to add some error handling here. The first thing we're going to do is try and fetch data from the API. So we'll say response. We'll store the response from the API here. And again, async always goes with await. So we'll use the fetch API. And the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need the API URL. So API underscore, we'll add the API here. So say API underscore URL. And the next thing that goes to this API, we can again refer to our API endpoint. The next thing that goes here is the search query. So we're going to also need the search query. The query that will go here in this case is when you call the function, we're going to pass in the search query here, and you'll see how how that is going to happen in a moment. So the next thing we add here is the query. After adding the query, again, this API does not have an API key, so we'll just proceed with this as is. Then the response that we get, we're going to convert it to JSON. So we'll store it in a variable called data. So say await response.json. And now that we have our data in JSON, we can try and see that data. So we'll try and console.log the data. So console.log data. Then we'll see what kind of data that we're getting. So we need a catch here. So try always go with catch. This is for catching any errors that might come up in case any of this isn't met. I mean, in case if there's an error when we're trying to fetch data from the API. So here we can print the error to the console for the user to see what the console is. I mean, what the error is. So we can just say, can try console. Actually, let's just do console.error, and we're going to just say, tell the user that there was an error while fetching the data. So error fetching the recipes that you want. And we'll have that error, the entire error log here. And when again, if there's an error while fetching, we'll try and return an empty string to the user, an empty array. So we'll return an empty array to the user. But let's go to the browser and see how this looks like. The first thing we need to call this first, and then we also need to give it a query. So before we get all that, we need to go ahead and try to get the query first. So for that, what we'll do is we'll need to add an event listener to the search button. So we'll say search button dot add event listener, and we're going to listen to a click event. And what is going to be executed here, the first thing that we're going to first of all get is what the user inputs. Yeah, and how we get that, let's first of all, we'll store it in a variable we call the variable query. Now what you'll do is search button, not search button but search input. This is where we're getting the user input from. So when say search input dot value, that is going to get the value that the user inputs on the input bar here. So whatever the user is going to input here, we pick it up. The next thing we'll do, we'll use the .stream method to get, again, you can hover over it again to see what it does. But the tree is going to get rid of any extra white spaces that might come up while we're typing in the query. So we'll just add some checking here. So if there's a query from the user, we'll go ahead and pass in that query to get a recipe. So we'll store this in a variable, and we'll call this variable recipes. We're going to call the fetch recipes function that we created up here, and we'll pass in that query. Now, once we pass in the query, the result that we get is what we are storing to recipes here. Now, what we'll go do after that is we can console.log the recipes. What we'll do here for the data, we're going to return the data instead of console.logging, because we have already done that here. So we're going to return the data. This doesn't need the parentheses. Was a mistake. Okay, let's go to the browser and try to check something. So I'll inspect first. We'll go and check so let's say we start with pizza. So if we check pizza on search, You see, we're getting a response on the console. So we're getting this telling us the count is 28, and then recipes array again. So you can see this, as you can see, it's an object, has two things. It has a count and recipes. The only thing we're interested in here are the recipes. Now for that, what we'll need to do is we'll come here and just get data dot recipes. Once we get data dot recipes, now if we try and search for something again, let's go and try pizza one more time. When we search, now as you can see, we're only getting an array of all the pizzas that are here. That's the first step. We've been able to successfully send a request to the API. We've gotten a response, and the response, we've gotten all the recipes that we need for our application. We added, of course, this event listener was really important to add. So when someone clicks or when this event is triggered, we can be able to see the output here on the console. The next step that is remaining is getting the output from the console and adding it rendering it here to the page, and that is what we're going to look at in the next session.